And welcome back, House Stackers. It's Jim Garvin. We're so excited for you guys to be back. Damon, this is a session that you have been telling me about for a while. And I got to tell you, I know nothing about this part of real estate. I'm really excited because you mentioned our guest today as someone that has been just very successful in what he does and his specific niche. And so why don't you introduce our guest and get our conversation going?
Yeah, Jim. So I am super excited to interview Justin Herrema, who has helped me in so many different ways. I first met Justin back at one of the Meet the Masters in California many, many years ago. And what turned me on was the fact that, I had this old IRA sitting in cash from a previous employer, earning next to nothing. And here Justin was up on stage introducing this new concept, what was called a land contract or a contract for deed, where essentially I could buy notes for properties within my IRA and earn a steady, 9 to 11% return. And it had some inherent protections versus traditional rental properties, which we're going to discuss today. So without further ado, Justin, welcome to the Stacking Houses Academy.
Thanks, Damon. And thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So Justin, happy to have you here. Let's just jump into it for our audience. How did you first get into land contracts, and also, explain to us, how do they work and how they differ from traditional rental properties?
Sure. Well, it'll probably be the easiest thing to go over how they work, and then I'll kind of go over how I got into them. A land contract, or like you said, contract for deed, it's simply a seller financing tool. It's very, very similar to a mortgage, but there's a couple differences. If I'm a bank and you're the borrower and you borrow $100,000 for a house, you get the deed. So you are holding the deed and I've just loaned you the money. So with a contract for deed or land contract, there's that money exchange. It's payments over time, but you don't get the deed. You only get the deed when it's paid off. However, you still have equitable interest and you are still responsible for repairs on the house, upkeep, insurance, similar to a mortgage. And we can go into that in more detail, but I wanted to give in a nutshell what that looks like before I go too far into this. So as far as how I got into land contracts, that goes back to when I was 19. And I was very ambitious, wanting to get into real estate. I thought this was going to be pretty easy. I don't have any debt. I was at the time working for my dad, making okay money. And I remember going to a bank and I met with a commercial banker, and basically he looked at me and he says, well, we got a problem. You don't have any credit. I said, well, that's good, isn't it? I don't have any debt. And he says, well, that's not really how it works. And so I found out the hard way that, I learned basically schools don't prepare you for that. And I'm finding out now that I'm not going to be able to borrow or get into real estate the way I wanted. So one night I'm watching TV and Carlton Sheets comes on. I don't know if you remember that name.
I do.
And it's talking about financing and this, and I remember this course was like $300 and some dollars. Back then it was a really big deal to me, but I bought the course and I, was very excited hearing about I can still do real estate without going to a bank. After going through the course and going through all of this stuff, I learned a little bit. It wasn't as helpful as I wanted, but what it did was that was a point in time where that investment made me commit. I was committed to making this work. And I started calling up investors. I started going to, local RPOA meetings, rental property owners associations, things like that, and basically saying, hey, is anybody looking to sell a house on contract? I'm interested in buying. And so I didn't have a lot to pick from. So when a deal came up, I tried everything to make it work. I mean, there were so many deals I wouldn't have touched, but I was like, if I saw 5,000 profit margin, I was where there's no way on earth I would touch a deal. So I did my first couple deals, made a little bit of money, bought them on land contract. I didn't even have the typical down payment to put down. But my selling point to these investors at that point in time was, look, I'm going to be fixing the house up. I'm going to be painting. I'm going to be doing this. And if for some reason it doesn't work out, you're going to take the house back in better condition. So yeah, I don't have, $5,000-$10,000 to give you for a down payment. But if you let me into this with no money down, I'll get this house fixed up. And worst case is you're taking it back with an improved home. And I was able to twist a couple people's arm that, they trusted me and I made it work and made some money, and I was hooked. So I probably did my first 6 real estate transactions that way. And then, after that and signing up for some dumb little $300 credit limit Discover card and finally building some credit, then I went back to this banker, and after he basically showed the board everything, and hey, this guy's been doing this, he can make a lot more money if we're giving him a line of credit. I was basically approved for a $250,000 commercial line. Wow. And that was kind of a game changer for me. But that was the start of me getting into real estate, was off seller financing. So then fast forward a handful of years, and I kept growing my business, dabbling in this and that, trying flips, doing rental properties, even doing some vacation rentals like an Airbnb. And as time went on, I had close to 80, I think it was 82 rental properties. And in 2010, I got into a bad snowmobile accident. And I thought I was going to be done. I remember flying through the air and I'm like, this is it. And all of a sudden, in this amount of time, it's amazing all the thoughts that go through your head in a split second. But I started thinking about, is my wife going to know how to handle everything? Is she going to know where to pick up the pieces to all these puzzles, right? And keep the puzzle together, so to speak. And, I'm literally, while I'm going through the air, all this is going through my head, and I'm already thinking, no, she's going to be lost. Isn't going to know what to do. So I fortunately survived. I was really banged up, tore a knee apart, broke my hand, was kind of hurting all over. And I had to stay in bed for about 2 months. And during that point in time, it was very, very challenging with business. I had people working for me and I was still directing them, but without being able to be there running things. That is when I realized rentals are passive, but yet they're not. It's a business. And with rental properties, I think that it's a great passive, and it's a great investment, but it's more of an active passive versus I realized at that point in time, I had 3 land contracts just because it was people that asked if I would sell a property that was for rent on land contract. And I knew a little bit about it. And I had 3 of those, and I realized that those 3 way outperformed my rentals that were the same dollar for dollar investment. And the
And
reason,
just real quick, Justin, those 80, I think you said 83 rental properties that you had,
I think the number was 82. But
82, were you self-managing those properties, or did you have a professional management team in place to kind of carry the ball for you?
so yes and no. I had a property manager at the time, or a little bit before that. That was terrible. I really learned my lesson on researching property managers and really doing your homework first, and that not all property managers are going to be good people that are looking out for your best interest. So I kind of learned that the hard way, and got screwed over a little bit by a company. So then I decided to start my own property management company. And I thought, well, I have enough of a base that it's easy enough to start that. And then if I'm selling off other rental properties to clients or whatever, I can help them out too. So I had staff, and I had basically a property management company that was handling all my properties, but I was still running that company, if that makes sense. So it may be different for somebody like you, Damon, where you've got, maybe some properties here and there, even other states where you know that when you bought a property, this was a vetted property management company. They're
Right.
solid. Like I said, I learned the hard way through a lot of things. So I'm not saying rental properties are all like that. I'm just saying what I was going through at the time, because I've certainly had some rentals, like in Kalamazoo. I had a handful of college rentals with a great property management company, and I liked those. So I was just realizing I was way more active on that side of things than with the land contracts. And I only had 3 land contracts at the time, but my motivation was at that point when I realized this was my wife would be able to handle and take over contracts that are set up and in place. That's pretty self-managed. It's fairly easy, less involved than rentals. And so that was really my motivation. And that's when I kind of changed my business structure, and I stopped doing rental properties. And then I focused on seller financing. And so it was twofold. It was the cash on cash investment that I looked at when I compared my rentals to the same dollar amount investment on a land contract. Now there's pros and cons to that, and I'm sure we can get into.
Yeah, let's maybe jump into some of the mechanics of how they work. I mentioned before, the concept when you first hear land contract or contract for deed or even seller financing, for some of our newer investors, kind of break that down. How do they work, and I guess simplify the process for us, if you could.
Sure. So a standard deal is going to involve a down payment. So if I'm selling a property on land contract to you, Damon, and let's say you're buying a property from me for $100,000, I'm typically going to require anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 down, depending on the house, depending on what was put into it, how nice it is, etc. So let's say, just for simple numbers, it's $5,000 down. So we go to close, and you're going to bring in $5,000 in cash. And in the land contract, it's going to show a purchase price of $100,000, $5,000 down payment, with a balance of $95,000. Now, the typical interest rates on land contracts are fairly high, because it is a unique. It's supposed to be more of a shorter term type loan to get somebody into a better loan or a better product. We charge 9% There's a lot of investors out there that charge 11. So you would owe $95,000 at 9% interest to me, and that's set up on a 30-year amortization schedule. We don't do a balloon, but we will typically set it so it will adjust to 11% after 5 years. So after 60 months, the 61st payment is going to be, it will adjust to 11%. So the motivation is still there for you, Damon, to get whatever you need to get tweaked within that 5 years so you can refinance, you can get into a better product. And the goal is to allow you into home ownership when you couldn't go through a bank for whatever reason.
Sure.
So, and most of the time it's situations like I ran into when I was younger, just no credit. I having no clue about credit, so we like to actually coach people on what that looks like. So because of going through all that, I know exactly what type of debt to income ratio you should be looking at, what, to use under 20% of your credit limits on your credit card. So if you have a $10,000 limit, don't go over $2,000 in any given month, even if you pay it off every month, because
Right.
Anytime you're over 20% utilization, your credit gets dinged. So I try to coach people on that. There's not a lot of good resources out there for education on this for people. So we're trying to offer that home ownership sooner, because often the people think they're going to get approved. They're going to go to the bank. This is simple. I'm sick of renting. And then they're shocked when they find out they can't get approved.
Right. So just to, I guess, bring it all together, if I'm the investor and I want to buy a land contract, right?
Yep.
There may be a buyer who puts, 95% down.
Yep.
Or I'm sorry, 5% down and finances the remaining 95%, right?
Yep.
I'm the investor, and I can expect to receive anywhere from a 9 to 11% return on my investment.
Yep.
And then I guess what's different is that these folks are trying to get into home ownership. So, and they don't have stellar credit. So therefore they're going to pay a higher interest rate for some shortened period of time, even though it's on a 30-year AM schedule. The idea here is to improve credit, show that they're making payments on a regularly each month, improve their situation, and then refinance to a bank at some point in the future. Let's talk a little bit about, the fact that, this is their house, right? What are they responsible for as a homeowner?
Mm-hmm. And so this is where it becomes very different than a rental property. And the responsibility is really all on them. Now state to state becomes a little different. So if you are from example, Georgia is very different. Their contract for deed structure is very different than Michigan. Louisiana is also very different. I learned that the hard way. Did a couple deals there, and had to go to court because somebody wasn't doing something they were supposed to, and it was on the exterior of a house. So yeah, I definitely check, state to state on what those differences are. However, for the most part, they're all fairly similar. And so, for example, in Michigan, if I sell a property to you, Damon, on land contract, your responsibility is it's your house. You have to get insurance. Now, we require that we're added as the additional insured on your insurance policy, so that if you have a fire, you can't just go collect a check and take off.
Yep.
We're involved. But let's say you have a dog and it goes and bites somebody. I'm not the one getting sued. You are. You know what I mean? If you're a tenant, and I've had so many tenants that, it says in the lease, no pets. And I go over there for whatever reason, or one of my guys goes over there and there's two dogs there. And it's like, okay, it's a bad situation because that dog bites somebody. I'm getting sued and my insurance is going to fight me on it because I didn't disclose there's a pet there, but I didn't know they snuck a pet in. Right. So there's those, there's less liability on the contract versus renting. If there's a toilet leaking, that's on you then, Damon, as a buyer to fix. If your furnace goes out, that's on you.
Right.
Now, we try to make sure there's no major issues, that a roof is good, the furnace is good, major items, because we don't want somebody coming and buying a house, investing a bunch of money into a down payment. Somewhat, they might be putting themselves in a little bit of a pinch where they don't have a lot in reserves anymore. And I don't want somebody having a furnace go out in that situation. So we try to make sure all those things are done. But bottom line is, if there's a repair on the house, there's something that goes wrong, it's going to be your house to fix. Right. Where a tenant, it's the opposite. And a lot of tenants' mentality, unfortunately, is, hey, this isn't my house. Why do I care? Right. And so there's a very big difference in the mindset. So the upkeep is, and the property is typically upkept nicely from the homeowner that has bought the property and owns it. And I'm not saying all tenants are like that. There's definitely great tenants.
Sure. No, I completely understand. So they're responsible for the upkeep on the house, and it's their house, so they're going to want to improve it. They're responsible for the insurance, the taxes, and if I'm hearing you correctly, you're going to want to probably, escrow the taxes and insurance so that you're not left holding the bag if for whatever reason they default and they can't make payments, et cetera, or they just, they don't make those payments to, for taxes and insurance, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And another very important thing too is we don't just approve anybody. So we'll work with people that have no credit or a couple things on their credit, things like that. But debt to income ratio, actually, we're looking to be, we're much more strict than a traditional bank. So conventional financing typically allows people to go up to 45, even a little more percent of their debt to income ratio. And I think that that's too much. I mean, if somebody misses a paycheck or their car breaks down, that's putting them in a bind because you're talking gross income.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal to me is how we approve, and we're typically looking at a 33% debt to income ratio, keeping people, but we want to see them succeed. And that's the bottom line is if our system isn't going to work, if Damon, you're buying the property from me, and it's not going to work for you, not going to work for me, not going to work if I sell that note off to somebody else, if it's not going to be a win all the way around.
Yeah.
Hey, Justin, it's Jim. Yeah, just a question for you. First off, thank you so much. I think this is fascinating. And just for our listeners, I almost compare some of this to what I would consider triple net in the commercial world. Where you're basically putting everything back. Now, in Justin's case, this person is acting as an owner. Whereas in the commercial world, maybe they're more of a long-term tenant, et cetera. But my question for you, Justin, is roughly what are some of the default rates that you've experienced, and can you walk our listeners and students through when a owner on a land contract defaults? What is the process? How does that work?
Sure. I haven't checked the default rates in a while. I haven't tracked that as much. When I was tracking that and keeping close tabs on it, we were between 5 to 7%. Um,
Wow,
now,
that's pretty good.
yeah, and that was out of mind. I don't try, if you were to buy a note from me, Jim, I don't have a good way to track. If you buy 10 notes, I don't have a good way to track what's going on in your portfolio. So I could only track what I've done, what I have going, so to speak. And I had it was roughly about 55% of them were refinancing within that 5-year period. There was other ones that, they're gonna just keep it going, so their interest rates going up. But some people, out of sight, out of mind, they don't, if they're not being reminded constantly, like, hey, you should be getting on your credit, you should be getting this stuff in line so you can refinance. A lot of people are not going to try to tackle those issues unless it's right in front of them, right? And so sometimes it takes them having that interest rate jump before they really start paying attention to it. So yeah, it's been right in there. Now the process, if there's a default, I believe that's what you asked me, right?
Yes.
So how that looks, it's in Michigan, it's handled as a forfeiture, not a foreclosure. And that's a very big difference, because if you have a mortgage and somebody defaults on a mortgage, that's a foreclosure, which can take quite a bit of time to foreclose on a property, right? It's often 9 months. State to state, it can be a little different. But a foreclosure works like this. Jim, if you were to owe me, $3,000 and some dollars in payments you haven't made, and you owe me that, 95 grand as a balance, I can foreclose and call the whole note due. So I can literally do the foreclosure for the whole balance, and it'll force you have that 9 months or whatever to pay me off completely, or I get the house back, right? So that's how banks typically work. Now, with a forfeiture, it's a forfeiture of contract. And you owe me a couple $1,000s in payments, I can start a forfeiture for that. Let's say it's $2,500. And when I start that paperwork, you have 15 days to pay that. If you don't pay it in that time frame, that gets filed with the court, and then basically we go to court, and then I'm granted a possession judgment, is what that's called, and you have 90 days to cure your default, or the property reverts back to me. Now, the difference is I'm not able to, and I wouldn't do that anyway. I can't call the whole 95,000 due. So if your balance is 95,000, I can call due what you're defaulted on. So anyway, a big difference there between a forfeiture and a foreclosure. So I would say that the whole time frame is typically 4 months on a forfeiture. By the time you're getting to court, you have your redemption period, which is 90 days. You're typically looking around 4 months. Whereas a foreclosure, like I said, it's 9 months to a year typically.
And listeners, I've actually gone through this process myself. It sounds scarier than it is. I've got a bunch of properties with land contracts in Michigan. I've never been up to Michigan to visit any of these properties, which I think sounds peculiar to many folks. But I've actually had one of the owners default on the payment, and it actually worked out in my benefit. In fact, I put together a case study for this week. If you go to this week's lesson plan, you'll see that there's a case study where with the help of Justin, we actually turned this property around, gained possession, and it had a close to 90% return on my investment. over a 4-year period of time. So don't be afraid of this process. Justin, just in the interest of time, I know we're coming up, on a half an hour here. One thing I do want to get into just real quickly, if we could, is, how to actually buy a land contract. With, as I mentioned before, I had some money sitting in an old IRA, and I was able to outright buy these properties, right, and hold them within my IRA. So I want to quickly discuss that. And then also, listeners, you should be aware that when you invest within your IRA, there are what are called prohibited transactions that the IRS forbids you to actually work on your property yourself if it's held within your IRA. It's got to be an arm's length transaction. So you, your spouse, your children, your parents, those are all disqualified individuals that the IRS prevents you from working on your property. That's something that you should be aware of. I've got this awesome book. It's the Self-Directed IRA Handbook by Matt Sorensen, who is an attorney. I can say that I am not a tax expert. I'm not an attorney, and I don't believe Justin or Jim is either. So you're going to want to consult an expert when you're doing this within your IRA. But Justin, if you could, just maybe explain how some of your customers have actually bought these land contracts.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Matt is actually a great source for any detailed questions on these types of things. So the first step is really finding a custodian that where you can place this self-directed IRA. So there's many out there. There's Quest IRA, there's there's just a massive list. And I see pros and cons with all of them. I don't have like a particular favorite necessarily. I would say the one thing that people should look for when shopping for where they want to what custodian they would want to manage their self-directed IRA would be look at the transactional fees. And what I mean by that is when you are buying a property, are they charging you just for, they could be charging you a % of the total money they're managing, or they're having to deal with? Are they charging, $100 per transaction that you have to buy? Are they charging $1,000? These companies are all over the place. But find a good custodian is the first step. And then from there, it's pretty simple. So like if Damon is buying a land contract note from me and we put together a purchase agreement for that, basically that gets sent over to the custodian, and basically the custodian ends up handling the transaction, signing at the closing, and basically handling everything going forward. Because like Damon said, a lot of things have to be arm's length transactions. So there's a lot of things Damon wouldn't be able to handle that they have to handle. And there's some more in-depth ways of going about it that you could, where you have LLCs owned by that self-directed IRA, et cetera, but that's more for Matt. So, so when that changes title, what we do, and this is something we really haven't covered, but we use what's called note servicers. And that's really what I prefer. I don't recommend people to self-manage their notes. So there's several companies out there. You got like Evergreen Note Servicing, you have Madison, there's FCI, there's quite a few of them. There's a couple that are my favorites, but anyway, let's say Damon already has 10 properties with FCI. Well, I might be using Madison or Evergreen. Well, obviously, if he buys a note from me, he's probably going to want that with FCI. So we change the servicer over, give the proper notices to the land contract buyers where they're going to send that payment at what day. And then, of course, he would add that to his FCI account. And the nice thing about that is Damon's kind of more behind the scenes. The buyer there, they're sending their payments to FCI. They don't know who Damon is. And that's very much like a mortgage. When you're paying your mortgage, a lot of times that's the servicer. That's not the real entity that's holding your note, so to speak.
Right.
They're just the servicer. So that's, I mean, kind of breaking it down real quick, that's what a sale looks like. Now there's also buying on a land contract. I don't know if you were talking about that. I think you were just talking about the sale, correct?
Correct. Just a sale at this point. Yeah.
Yep.
But let's say I have $60,000 and the note is $90,000. Can I buy, can I buy a percentage of that note, or can I finance the remaining portion where I don't have the full amount?
I have seen some funding out there for notes. I don't think you can do that when it's your self-directed IRA. I think if you were personally funding, you said, hey, I got 60,000 extra to spend that's not in your self-directed IRA, and you wanted to borrow 30,000, there are sources to do that. But if it's in your self-directed IRA, then I know for a fact that you cannot, you can't borrow or have other partners coming in if it's not arm's length. I've seen two separate IRAs buy one note where it was that scenario. And there were two unrelated parties, but they were friends, and where they, let's say it was $100,000 note and they both had 50,000, and they went in 50-50, and their IRAs each funded half of it. So I have seen that before.
Great. Okay. Well, Justin, we are kind of up on time. I appreciate you, going through each one of these pieces. It is a little bit complex, but I think we've got a really smart audience that can grasp this. If our audience wants to learn, more about land contracts, or even, some of the projects that you're working on, where can our audience, find you online?
Sure. One of my main websites is landcontractrealty.com. I also have landcontractnotes.com, but we're revamping the site. So at the current moment, that one's is going to look like it's having some issues, but we're revamping that. So I would say landcontractrealty.com is the easiest way to find me.
Great.
So, cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. See you later, house stackers.